Hello and welcome. I want to welcome everybody to the World Taste and Smell Association presentation for Parosmia Awareness Day, Living with Parosmia. I'm Stephanie Foyer. Along with Mindy Yang, we're co-founders of the World Taste and Smell Association. One of the most challenging experiences of my life was developing parosmia after viral smell loss. That constant foul smell robbed me of pleasure. It gave me headaches and crippling depression. And I know that's a symptom many of you have experienced. Today, we're going to talk about living with parosmia. One of the tenets of the World Taste and Smell Association is support for people living with smell disorders. And we're dedicated to advancing the science and the real-world impact of taste and smell. We're a nonprofit think tank, an applied research partner and media platform. And we translate sensory science into real-world impact through education, advocacy, and public engagement. From taste and smell disorders to multisensory product development, the World Taste and Smell Association leads high-impact initiatives that bridge research, storytelling, strategic partnerships, all to improve the well-being for all. It's great to see some familiar faces here. Simon Gane, Mr. Simon Gane, is a consultant rhinologist and ENT surgeon with a specialist interest in sinus and anterior skull-based surgery. His practice is Nose and Sinus MD, and he's in the NHS at the Royal National Ear, Nose and Throat and Eastman Dental Hospitals, and he's an ENT surgeon for the Moorfields Eye Hospitals. The reason I'm calling him Mr. rather than doctor is because in the UK, Mr. is a higher clinical designation than doctor. Mr. Gane is qualified for medicine in 1996 at the University of Cape Town, South Africa, and he went on to gain his postgraduate qualifications, including specialist surgical training in the North Thames Deanery. Simon is a well-respected individual in the scientific community. He's got over 30 peer-reviewed publications and book chapters on rhinology and smell. He was awarded his MPhil in the physics of human olfaction and the olfactory receptor in 2019. Along with Chrissi Kelly and their colleague, Dr. Jane Parker of Reading University, they authored an important paper that we're going to hear about today on the molecular basis of parosmia, based on trends from the AbScent Parosmia group. This paper was the first one to provide some understanding of the origins of this distressing condition. I think many of you know Chrissi Kelly. She is inspired by her personal journey of recovery from smell loss. She lost her sense of smell following a virus in 2012. She founded the UK-registered charity AbScent in 2019. AbScent was a hub of information, presentation, and connection. At its height, it reached 92,000 members and had over 2 million visitors to the website during the pandemic years. The AbScent community contributed to research by sharing their experience, clarifying trends, most notably in the experience of parosmia. There are some of you, some names I recognize from those communities, and you all know that it was a tremendous support for all of us while we're going through our smell dysfunctions. Because Chrissi is uniquely positioned to work with both patients and scientists, she's contributed to peer review papers, more than 30 of them, on smell loss. She attends the annual residential course on smell dysfunction in Dresden, which is hosted by Dr. Thomas Hummel. And this year, she's going to be a speaker on the patient experience. AbScent closed its doors in 2023, but she remains active as a patient advocate on a volunteer basis. Many of you are part of the Facebook groups where she signposts clear science-based resources, teaches smell training, and you may know that she also runs virtual events. She's spoken at conferences in the UK, in Germany, in Turkey, in Greece, in Spain, and the US. She's created a significant body of work of written resources for patients and helped establish a rehabilitation center near Barcelona. And she's been featured in media, TV, radio, and newspapers as well. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody to please turn their mics off. And then I do want to first start with Simon. Parosmia is a very confusing condition. When you first have those weird smells, you don't know what's going on. And even as you start experiencing it, what is it? What are the characteristics that cause or that relate to parosmia?
So I suspect that most people, thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk here today. I think that parosmia is still very under-recognized, but I suspect that most people here today will be able to tell me more about it than I can tell you. But from a clinical point of view, from the doctor's side, parosmia is part of a group of what we call qualitative olfactory disorders. In other words, it's a change in the quality of the smell. So instead of, yes, I can smell, oh, no, I'm not so good at smelling, or no, I can't smell, so what we call normosmia, hyposmia, and anosmia, you can smell, but it's not useful, or it's unpleasant, or it's disgusting. And those qualitative disorders, I credit Chrissi with discovering one of them, although we're still fighting about getting that recognized, which she called smell lock or olfactory perseveration, where a smell gets stuck in your nose. Then there's phantosmia, where a smell is there even though there's nothing to smell. And then finally, parosmia, which, if I had my way, would be called troposmia. So tropos is to twist. Parosmia just means next to. And I think the tropos is much a better description of this altered in a disgusting way sense of smell. Because as a lot of you will know, it's possible to have an alteration of your sense of smell after viruses or infections or head injuries or anything else like that. But what makes parosmia, in my mind, so important is this quality of disgust, this visceral feeling that is revolting. It is activating the part of the brain or somewhere within the olfactory system that tells you you should not eat this. So that's probably what the olfactory system is developed for, is your early warning to stop people from eating things that are disgusting. But somehow that gets miswired in this condition, and things that should be delicious, coffee, roast meats, things like that, suddenly become very vile and disgusting, turn your stomach, and you can't actually face putting them in your mouth. It activates the safety mechanism for you when it really shouldn't have. And this happens probably in recovering olfactory sensory systems. There's some work following on from Chrissi and Jane's work, which seems to suggest that it is more of a characteristic of partial recovery or of recovering. And we used to think that there was actually a positive sign of recovery if you developed parosmia. But it's not that pleasant when you're going through it. So, so I think hopefully that defines it. We tried to come up with a clinical definition, which is probably a bit dry, in a sort of consensus paper from the European Working Group on Olfaction. And really, we found four. Well, my argument, developed with Chrissi, is that there are four characteristics of this thing. So the smell has the same time as a normal smell. In other words, it lasts roughly the same time. It's triggered, so it is something that you are smelling that then starts this sensation. It's the same time. It is altered in some way. It doesn't smell like it used to. And I think this is most important, and this to this day is the thing that annoys me, that I could not get the rest of the group to sign off on. It is this disgusting element that's so important.
Disgusting is certainly otherworldly. All of those possible.
Yeah, visceral, emotional, deep down, primitive. And we always talk about smell being the first sense, and sort of wired into the brain in all sorts of very basic ways. And this is when one of those wirings goes wrong.
Chrissi, I know that in the groups, you notice that the onset of parosmia sometimes happened after people had smell loss, and then perhaps parosmia, as Simon mentioned, was a positive signal. But what is that experience of then all of a sudden you didn't smell and then you start smelling something? What were people describing it as?
Well, I think that was, and by the way, thank you for having me. I think that was the first clue that we were going to be inundated with people who are experiencing a lot of problems because, although we kind of saw that a bulk of people were coming in roughly 3 months after they'd had COVID. Now, this is just talking about the pandemic. There were, of course, plenty of people that had parosmia straight away, and other people who, like me, the second time I had total smell loss, it was sort of 5-6 months before I developed parosmia. So I guess everyone comes along with with a different timeline. But I can remember the first time it happened when I had my initial loss in 2012. I had virtually no kind of olfactory signals for 3 months. And then suddenly I was experiencing a kind of very, very low level of, of, of smell sort of inklings that were meaningless and were unpleasant. And then over time, they coalesced into a number of different groups that I could sort of say, well, these are kind of more vegetal, these are more kind of meaty and disgusting, and so on. But that is the first thing that I think anyone in this group would be willing to agree to, is that it is so hard to explain. And not only that, it is so distressing. So when you are distressed and you want to explain that to someone, a caregiver, for instance, the doctor you're sitting in front of, it's very hard to do this if you just don't have the words to describe the actual experience, B, the rising level of panic that you yourself don't even understand. And when we Simon just gave some really these 4 points, which are so good, I think, but behind all of them is this emotional or psychological reaction we're having to our experience that is really, at least it was for me, and I think it is, I've observed this lots in the parosmia group, this sort of feeling like every time it passes through your mind, that is to say, every time you take a breath, you feel like something inside you is hitting a panic button. And that's just such a terrible way to live. And it's so difficult to describe to someone who's trying to help you.
I find it so interesting that you said that you had a number of different smells. I know I only had one smell, and but I had multiple triggers. And I want to talk about triggers for a moment, because that was the heart of the research, and it really made such a difference in our understanding when you and Simon and Jane Parker looked at the molecular triggers. I hope you could both describe how that process started and just the sniffing that was involved, and then the results.
So the project,
the
project with Jane started in 2019 in March. I was asked, for reasons that at the time I did not understand, to give a short presentation at a food flavor conference in Amsterdam. And I said to the guy that was organizing it, because we followed one another on Twitter, and I guess he thought what I was saying was of interest, and he contacted me and said, "Oh, we're having this conference. Every year we have some kind of an outlier come in and give a presentation that's different or slightly off the beaten track. So would you like to come and talk about parosmia?" So I did. And I talked about the kinds of triggers that people were mentioning in the Facebook group. Now, this time there was no Facebook Parosmia group. That came after COVID, but before COVID, there were still plenty of people in my original group and plenty of conversation about parosmia. And one thing that came up over and over again was coffee, onions, meat cooking, deep fat frying, things like that. So I made this little presentation, and afterward, a woman came up to me who turned out to be Jane Parker, and she said, "I think I know exactly what the problem is." And so that is where it all began. And we started with me going into the lab at Reading and using this marvelous device that will take the smell of something. We settled on coffee because that seemed to be very common. And you take a bit of this, of whatever it is, so in our case coffee, and you put it into a machine, very complicated. I won't go into. I'll let Simon tell you about it if you're interested. And it takes that smell with all of its different odor compounds in it, and it pulls it apart molecule by molecule. And you, the test subject, sit there and smell each individual molecule, and they come out based on weight. So you get the light molecules first and the really heavy ones at the end. And you can sit there until you, like me, say, "Oh my God, that's the one." And so we did this a couple of times. We did it with a couple of different substances. And then Jane said, "Right, what we're going to do is we're going to get some people with parosmia in the door, and we'll have them do this thing." So we had, I don't know, we had maybe 16 or 18 people that had come in before the pandemic. Then the pandemic happened. Then we had a whole new crop of people with parosmia. So we had, interestingly, we had pre-pandemic and post-pandemic parosmics looking at this or being tested for this. And that became, then we brought Simon in because of his work. And we looked at that and worked out which molecules were responsible for triggering disgust in coffee. And I think that's it for me on that. And I'm sure Simon has a comment to make.
That's exactly right. And I always think about what happens if you hadn't met Jane at that meeting, like all the serendipity that's followed from that, and our understanding has gone from. So I don't have anything else to say apart from a GCSMS splits things on molecules on their weight and their ionic properties. And basically, so all the molecules, all the same molecule in that mixture is bunched in together and then transported along the tube and delivered to Chrissy's nose one at a time. And the other thing is that you talked, Stephanie, about having one smell. Chrissi, you said before that they always say that, "Oh, that's the parosmia smell," that it's always triggering the same kind of smell by different triggers. But what we found were that these, and this is what Jane came up to Chrissi to say in the first place, these are very powerful odorants. So you don't need much of them to be able to smell them. And they cluster in sort of little groups, often containing sulfothiols, which is typical of onions and garlic, or these pyrazines, which are very powerful odorants, typical of the coffee and the roasted meats. And it's very funny that all of those triggers, we found probably the specific molecules that's coming off for most people, that's coming off the roasted meat or the garlic or things like that are triggering the parosmia. And that's been.
Go ahead.
Sorry, carry on.
No. I think it's really interesting that it is these really, really stinky compounds that people talk about being able to perceive even when they have quite severe loss of smell. You might have taken the sniff and sticks test, and the only thing you get on it is the sort of fishy smell. I spoke to someone the other day who said she scores absolutely, in the very bottom of her the test that her doctor uses, and she was able to smell burning flesh in a very unpleasant experience that she had. So there are certain things that one might expect are associated with danger in a very sort of visceral sense. Strangely enough, fire does not seem to be one of them, but sort of raw, putrid smells and these sort of fishy ones. Anyway, sorry, that was.
I have a theory about that, but yes, I think that there are certain classes of receptors which are the alarm receptors, as you say, and they are expressed and wired in differently to the other nice to have floral receptors, for instance, and that's why they still pick up these and then they just get overstimulated by these very powerful odorants. We can talk about that. But anyway,
like
so there's very strong, very, very strong odorants, typical triggers. And that's not to say that those are the only triggers. I mean, all of you probably will have different patterns of triggers if you have parosmia, although they're the common ones. I've taken to sort of taking a list every time I see someone with parosmia. And I'm always amazed. Some people will like, oh no, toothpaste is fine, but spearmint is awful. Or coffee is fine, but meat is horrible. Some people have it for water, which is something that we would like to look at a little bit further.
So you were talking a little bit about receptors, and I want to drill down on that a little bit, because for me, those danger receptors were the things that first came back when my smells started coming back. And I wonder, if as we just saw that there's some research that they've finally found a smell map, and our receptors now are in a kind of striated pattern, and we're beginning to really understand how they're arranged. As we understand more, I think, underlying your hunch is that sense that those ones that are protective maybe are stronger or more broadly expressed in other ways. But looking at the chat, there's a question, and it leads to one of my next questions. Do you think there's ever going to be a way to address parosmia on a receptor level? And are there treatments now from a medical perspective? I know some people have been so driven by this that they have had something called burning done to their nasal passages. Talk about all of that.
So yes, there are, and like most treatments, you really have to gauge what the risks and what the benefits are. So the first thing to say is, for most people, as we said at the beginning, parosmia is a sign of a regenerating epithelium, which means that if everything's going in the right direction, the sense of smell is going to improve, and your parosmia is going to get less, unless you're skilled at getting recurrent infections like Chrissi Kelly and getting your sense of smell knocked out every couple of years. It's a good long-term prognosis if you have parosmia. For most people, it's not true for everyone. And for instance, the parosmia in head injury is quite different. But for most people, it's a good sign. And for most people, it's going to get better. It's going to become less intrusive, more tolerable with time. The number of triggers are going to decline. And for most people, they get better from it. But for those who are particularly severe, and Chrissi, you told me about somebody who basically couldn't eat anything apart from forticips and protein-reinforced drinks, I think. You've come across a couple of those in the groups. Yes,
I have. And for those people, I mean, the one person who sticks out in my mind who had her receptors ablated. I don't know, Simon, is that the right word?
Yeah.
It sounds awful, and it makes me cringe, but she said afterward she felt like she was, it was heavenly to finally be rid of this constant background chatter of disgust. And, that would be terrible to live with. So that each person would have to judge that with their doctor.
So Yeah. So I think you can see, so if it's persistent and if it's really a problem for you, you can't eat, you're losing weight, it's not enjoying your food, you're not able to go out, you're not all of those things, then there is a ladder of interventions that you can think about. And by far the best evidence supported, by far the safest, most effective, cheapest, easiest is, say it with me, Chrissi, smell training.
Training.
Everyone knows this over and over again. And I just keep, and I still to this day in my clinic see people who aren't doing it. Oh, I lost my sense of smell in March 2020 and it's been really horrible. And yet somehow I haven't done the most basic thing that's going to help. And even now, I think there are people who do benefit from it, even, 4, 5, 6 years later.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, and it is amazing. And I think that there are some smells that don't tend to come back, but in general, you get the more often and the more regularly and the more smells you do it with, the better. I'm singing from Chrissi's hymn sheet here.
There are a couple of questions in the chat I'd love to address. One, going back to that panic response, besides the primal experience of smell, the question is there any other reason for that panic response?
Simon, there was one study done that Thomas did that showed which parts of the brain light up when people are having a parosmic experience. And can you tell us a little bit about what that might reveal? Yeah,
so that the sense of smell, we always talk about the sort of the possibilities of the sense of smell because it's wired into some very deep, very old parts of the brain. And the insula and the amygdala, these bits of the brain that control very primal is a good word, emotions, anxiety, memory, and disgust are all in these areas that the sense of smell is directly wired in for. Most of the rest of your senses go through the thalamus. They're sort of regulated in various ways, but smell just plugs right in. So it has this very powerful way of evoking emotion in a way that's difficult to regulate because you're not going through the thalamus, the regulator part of the brain.
In terms of triggers, another question was about fermented foods, whether those have that same molecular composition that would be a parosmia trigger or not. Kimchi, for example. Miso.
Well, fermented foods, of course, will have umami in them. And umami is a basic taste. In other words, you experience it through the gustatory nerve, not through the olfactory nerve. So it stands to reason that people find fermented foods more pleasant and they feel like there's more flavor with that. Would you agree with that, Simon?
Yeah. And they've also got a little bit of vinegar, so they'll stimulate the bitter taste receptors, the sour taste receptors. So, and then you're going to get the crunch, and yeah. But I don't know of anybody who specifically said their parosmia is triggered by fermented foods. I can't see. I mean, maybe you're getting some thiols if you're in a sauerkraut, bit of onion in there. Can't see particularly.
Yeah,
Have you ever had that reported?
Yeah, I can't do kimchi with onions in it.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
So both Chrissi and I mentioned that we're post-viral. Is the progression from anosmia to parosmia different for people with traumatic brain injury?
So yes, it's definitely true that people with traumatic brain injury get parosmia, and they are less likely overall to recover than the post-virals. There's sort of various stories or just those stories about the way that TBI is associated with smell loss. You're supposed to shear the nerves. And if that's true, as the brain gets rocked back and forth, that's supposed to shear off the nerves that go into the nose. That's not the only way in which the damage is caused. But if that's true, that you can imagine that the regeneration is more difficult than for people who've lost it from infection, because those nerves, and especially the nerve bundles, are probably still intact, and the nerves can rewire up into the brain.
So we always assume that people know everything about smell training because it's something we've been talking about for so long. But I see there's a question in the chat, and I know that in my conversations with people with various smell dysfunctions, it always comes up. Why just 4 cents? Why not expand it? How long should I do it? Can it be things from my kitchen? Does it have to be essential oils? What are the different, and Chrissi, you've done a lot on this. What are the different
This is Chrissy's question.
of smell training that people might want to try, that specifically because we're talking about parosmia today, that might work with parosmia?
I'll start by saying that I just think that the phrase smell training is not doing the practice any favors. First of all, there's this idea, it's called training, so that sounds like something you don't really want to do. I would rather it be called smell awareness, because I think most people are just not aware of smell. And I think that the idea of the 4 jars and the essential oils and so on they're a great way to get started, and they're a great way to illustrate what you need to do. But that is by no means the end of the story. My experience is that most people who lose the sense of smell are so downcast by that experience and become depressed that they want to kind of switch off from this idea of smell, and they lose their natural curiosity for the smells that are available in their environment. Everything in your environment has a sense of smell, whether it's your pad of Post-it notes, or the coins in your wallet, or a can of tennis balls, or your winter coat when you take it out of the closet, or the inside of your car. There is a smell everywhere that you could conceivably train with. And when I talk about smell training in my online sessions, I try and help people understand this and give them tools to sort of access that. And there's a lady, here's a couple of people saying smell training doesn't help me. If you were sitting across the table from me, Liz, I'd like to explain it to you in a different way. And I think I might be able to help you. I mean, I don't know anything about your case. You may have had the kind of brain injury that means you will not smell again. But I think wherever there is an inkling of smell, wherever there are occasional moments where you can smell, whenever there is at least some activity in your olfactory nerve, you can train what's going on there. And I like to use the analogy of if you imagine a really big rope like you'd see on a ship, and if most of that rope has been cut through, but there are still a few fibers that connect the one side of the rope to the other, that might be where you are now. And if you have that, you also have the ability to exercise what remains. And, I was just reading there's a new book out called, I've got it over here, Rediscovering Flavor by Thomas Hummel and his colleagues. It's a book written, it's really aimed at clinicians, but there is a section in there on the regeneration of the olfactory nerve, and olfaction is unique in the body, or maybe not. I think there might be 1 or 2 other ways where
one more in the hippocampus, that's it.
One more in the hippocampus, and that's it. But olfaction is unique in that it does regenerate. And I would just like to keep any of you who are out there who say this does nothing for me and I'm just not progressing, I'd like to say, hang on and give it a second look, because like stroke rehabilitation, these nerves take a long time and they are regenerating. And it is the smelling with expectation when you smell train, and we know a lot now. We know a lot more now than we knew at the beginning of the pandemic about how the brain prepares itself to have a smell experience. This is known as the sommelier effect. You can prime people to smell certain things. This has been shown in laboratories, and all that kind of brain activity is something that happens in the higher part of the brain, and you can feed that activity into the olfactory bulbs from the top down. So when there's damage at the level of the olfactory bulbs, you might be telling yourself that with that roadblock in place, nothing is going up to where it needs to go for you to have a smell perception. But there are all these other parts of the brain that are active when a normosmic person smells something. And those can be harnessed and feed information into the olfactory bulb. And of course, all that activity serves to establish new neural networks. And that's what you need if you've had damage.
And I'll underscore that by saying that there's a lot of research that shows that once you've lost your sense of smell, there's some shrinkage in your cognition, in your actual gray matter, and that the continued stimulation that you get from smell, just the way people who lose their sight or who lose their hearing then are more prone to other cognitive disabilities. It's important for us to keep priming that pump of the olfactory world to keep our brains really going. There's another question in the chat about the connection between smell loss and Parkinson's and other neurodegenerative diseases. A little bit off topic, but I think something that we all worry about once we've experienced smell loss. And Simon, I wonder if you could address that a little bit.
Yeah, I wish you will remember that I think it's just toward the end of the first year of the pandemic, they came out with this paper saying, oh, when you've lost your sense of smell, that can be the first sign of Parkinson's. And that's absolutely right. But they implied that it was the other way around, that losing your sense of smell drove to Parkinson's. That's just not true. The smell loss in Parkinson is completely different to this kind of smell loss. So it's you can see it on the tests. It's a more essential processing problem than an input problem. So it made me very cross at the time. I thought it was very irresponsible and got a lot of people worked up in the groups.
Yeah.
Chrissi.
Yeah.
I want to talk about managing and living smell distortions for a while. I know for me, I had something that we call smell lock. Once I had a trigger, I was stuck with that awful smell for days. And I had to hold my nose or, bury my nose in my sleeve whenever I was walking by a deli because I was so afraid of that smell lock that I would get from bacon or frying food. I discovered, nose plugs again that I hadn't used since I was, swimming as a kid. And I discovered something called Ponaris, which is an emollient that they prescribed for sinus congestion for me when I was pregnant, because I couldn't take other medicines. And I know some people have tried Vicks Vapor Rub. People have tried acupuncture. People have tried all manner of other things. I found personally for me, exercise, strenuous activity, yoga inversions, holding downward dog for more than a minute, only with my eyes closed. I don't know why. Simon, maybe you have some insight. Definitely made the smell diminish. But food, that was a daily challenge. And I know, Chrissi, you've done a lot on how to eat and how to figure out what your safe foods are. Can you talk to us a little bit about eating with parosmia?
Yes, and Stephanie, this might be a time to show a couple of those two slides that I sent you.
Are you seeing it?
No, or maybe it's me. I just see all of us.
Hmm?
I don't know. Simon, can you see this? There we are. There we are.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So early on in the development of parosmia after the pandemic started, we kind of crowdsourced some things that people found helpful, which are summarized on this table. And starting at the top left, it was keeping a trigger list. And I'd like to stress that the triggers can change all the time. And therefore, you need to keep trying out what works and what doesn't work. I know for a lot of people who have severe parosmia, well, they don't want to, they're going to shun green peppers and not go near them. But if you can possibly steel yourself to do that, I think it can be quite helpful to keep checking in on what things might work. And if you live in a family where there are people in the house, other people doing the cooking and so on, it's helpful to have your trigger list on the fridge or somewhere in the kitchen or near wherever it is that you keep your shopping list, so that people are aware of, what they need to avoid. So trigger list is a really important, as well as a safe list. You might only have a handful of safe foods, and if that's the case, then you're going to have to stick with those safe foods because you need to eat. And certainly when people were recovering from COVID, they needed their strength and they needed nutrients and so on. So really important for you to keep eating. The next thing on that list is to keep a diary so you know the progression of your parosmia, and you can see that over time. It just helps you to get an idea of if there's been any improvement. So often the improvement that we experience happens on such a long time scale that you just aren't aware of it. And you get into a rut of feeling frustrated and dissatisfied and thinking that nothing's ever going to change and so on. But if you went and looked where you were 6 months ago, you might see some changes and think, oh, actually, that has changed. So I'm a big believer of keeping a diary. The next thing, bland foods. So that would be things like rice, pasta. If you can tolerate dairy, things like cottage cheese, mozzarella, things that don't have a very strong taste. So bland foods where you can find ones that you can tolerate. And interestingly, if you find that you don't tolerate one kind of rice, let's say you don't tolerate basmati rice or jasmine rice, then try long grain or try, even though the differences are really subtle to normosmics, they can be striking to people who have parosmia. And I would just like to clarify one. I mean, I'm preaching to the converted here, but I'd like to make one really interesting point, which is that when you say you've got parosmia, people think, oh, that's a stage of smell loss, and therefore you must not be experiencing it very strongly. It must be some sort of weak thing that's going on with yours. But quite the opposite. When you have parosmia, it's going off like a foghorn for you. And so when your friends hear that you've lost your sense of smell, and then you're like, oh my God, get that away from me, they don't understand that. So these differences, which are so striking for us, these disgusting triggers are so striking for us, and yet a slightly adjacent food that doesn't have that, whatever the molecule is in it, can be perfectly fine. So there's a fair amount of experimentation that needs to go on. The next thing on the list, fried foods, avoid. Just anything that's brown, whether it's been sauteed, fried, roasted, deep fried, and that pretty much hits all fast foods except for maybe the kind of sushi-based ones or itsu, where you get kind of like bone broth, that kind of thing. Most fast foods are just inedible. You might want to avoid these foods that have been cooked at high temperatures and instead go for foods that are cold or served cold. I was not able to eat a roast chicken. In fact, I still sort of find roast chicken not my first choice, but a cold chicken sandwich, great. No complaints. One woman came into the Parosmia group early in the pandemic with this brilliant idea for her morning coffee. She switched to iced coffee and was drinking it with a straw. So she got all of her caffeine fix and none of the disgust. The next thing that you'll see there are condiments. Use liberally. Some of them you'll find quite palatable. Things like ketchup have sugar and salt in them, of course, and that covers up a multitude of sins. Things that are spicy, so mustard, horseradish, soy sauce, of course, loaded with umami, great to put on your food. Chili sauce, that kind of distracts the mouth from whatever it is that you're eating. And and that sort of goes into the next illustration there, which is chilies and ginger. So those things are very often not parosmic, so give those a try too. The next to the last thing shows a plate. Food can be really disgusting, so I've got two suggestions for you. Make yourself tiny portions. Don't overwhelm yourself with a big plate of food that you're going to look at and think, no, I just can't face that. A tapas style serving or even a little bit of food on a small plate might make it more palatable for you, as well as other things that have to do with the way, our culture of sitting around a table and eating together has many elements to it, and not all of them have to do with what happens when we put a forkful of food into our mouths. So how you set up the table, who you're eating with, what the conversation is like, what are the colors on the plate, what are the different textures on the plate, all of those things go into making food, if not pleasurable, at least manageable. And finally, the nose plugs are on there for people who just can't cope with anything right now. And for those people, I would say, I've spoken to many people who are in that phase, but it seems to be just that, a phase, and they eventually come out the other end after their brain has learned that these things maybe are not necessarily dangerous. And they've had some level of recovery. So those are some strategies for you.
Some things that I've learned from you, Chrissi. So we talked about mint being a trigger, and toothpaste being disgusting for some people. I discovered that in America there are cinnamon toothpastes, and that can be a way of cleaning your teeth without the disgust every single time. So you can get them here as well. And then we talked about first bite, worst bite. We're going to talk a little bit about habituation as well. But if you can get through the first bite, often the second and the third are not nearly as bad. Because there is this habituation. We'll talk more about that, I think, as a training strategy later on.
I'd like to talk about that a bit, because it is a little controversial, that exposure therapy idea, and kind of forcing yourself to try things that you find disgusting in the hopes that you're going to desensitize yourself. it might work, but it might be cruel. Could you guys address that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't think it's the same thing as, say, getting children to eat broccoli and exposing yourself, 3 times a week to eating something like fried French fries, for instance. And, everyone's experience is very personal to them. And people will get very angry if you say, try and push through and see if you can get yourself used to this, get over that first worst bite. And for those people for whom that's just a hard no, there is no way you're going to convince them to try that. And yet the people who have done that seem to feel and come back and say, look, this is really a good strategy. It worked for me. I'm not saying that because it was my experience, but I'm saying that because many people have talked about that. But again, it's a really a personal thing. And I think no one can judge the extent to which your panic button is being pressed by your daily exposure to the environment like you can. And, you have to decide.
To that point, I found... Oh, go ahead, Simon.
Oh, I was just going to say, how many of the people in the group and my patients are like, oh, coffee was disgusting, but I really need my morning coffee. I put through and now it's fine. It's just over and over and over again. The caffeine addiction has driven them to improve their parosmia. And so that probably applies to everything else as well. But it's not, as Chrissi says, always an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
And I found that kind of exposure idea was one of the things that kept me away from social situations, because I didn't want to be in an environment anymore. I didn't want to go to restaurants with my friends where I knew I might grimace about something that was being served because all of a sudden I was overcome with disgust, or I didn't want to have to order mashed potatoes. That happened to be something that worked for me, plain mashed potatoes for a while. So I just stopped going out for a while. Not an option for everybody. And particularly if you're a caretaker, if you're cooking for your family, if your job involves social situations, those are not options that you have. Chrissi, in the groups, you've heard a lot of these stories. Could you talk a little bit about that?
You mean about rejecting social situations?
Mm-hmm. And how to deal with it?
Yeah, I think that is a really a sort of not dangerous, but a really unfortunate aspect of having parosmia is this withdrawal. I mean, you're already in pretty bad shape, losing your sense of smell. And to then further deprive yourself of the social interaction. I mean, we are commensal animals. We want to be together and eat together. Eating is a whole universe more than just putting food into your mouth. It helps us build social bonds, and there's a whole sort of anthropology of eating that we are. It's not good for us at this time to just completely withdraw, and yet I understand that. It's a bit like, do we push through or not? I found personally that it was more important to go out and be with people and experience that than to stay at home, which I feel is a kind of, you get stuck in that one spot of not wanting to go out, not wanting to go out. It's kind of a slippery slope. So I think that people in the group would agree on that you must keep trying. I have to say, after I make a statement like that, of course I know it's hard, but keep trying.
You go a lot more than I do. I mean, anosmia is already socially isolating. I know the number of people who told me there's a glass wall between me and my close ones, between me and my partner, between me and the world. So yes, anything that we can do to overcome that, but it takes actual effort, which is very hard when you're not feeling great to start with.
I want to open this up to people's questions in a bit, but before we do, I just want to talk a little bit about recovery. I know that for me, my parosmia has faded to the point where it's really only occasional. It's only triggered really in kind of the worst situations. And I have gotten maybe concurrently or not, a good portion of my sense of smell back. I know that's not the case for everybody here. But what does recovery look like as a standard? What can people expect or not expect?
Oh, I could talk about this for a very long time. And I'm trying to get Simon interested in my new theory on this. And that
I'm interested.
Okay. If you ask a clinician, what's the definition of recovery? Simon, you can speak for yourself, but I'm just going to say it's probably that you've got a patient who does not score well on an objective test. And what you'd like to do is bring them into the higher hyposmia or normosmia range. And I think that is the wrong definition. And this is what is keeping patients from communicating well with their clinicians. My definition of recovery is we look at a scale where on one end, you have a person who is thinking about their smell problem all the time. It's just a relentless, the button is being pressed. It's my panic button because I have parosmia, or I can't smell that, I can't smell, I'm never going to get ready. On the other end, on the recovery end, what does that look like? It looks like a day when you don't think about your smell problem. And Stephanie, you just said it. There are days when it doesn't bother me at all. And that, to me, is a better definition of what recovery is than saying that your score is X. I've got somebody in my group that I've been talking to privately who has an excellent sense of smell. He rates it at 100%, between 100% and 85%. He has days when he dips. When he has a dip, he is so distressed by this for reasons that are outside his nose problem. He's got other things going on in his life that make him worry about losing his sense of smell. And that person is traumatized by that dip in smell. And that person is not well yet. So that is my 2 cents on what recovery really looks like. And we want to get people to a place where they are not thinking about their smell problem in an ever spiraling negative kind of way.
I'll put numbers on that. No, I think you're exactly right. I always think, is it not only our current tools for objectively, it's always subjective, assessment of the sense of smell are terrible. They're so basic. I think they only measure the bottom 25% of our possible olfactory function. So it's possible to have an excellent sense of smell, lose it in a way that is devastating and really harms your mental health, and then come in and I will tell you have a normal sense of smell on all the tests that I do. But it's not good enough for you. But the problem is, if you have people like me, we want to put numbers on things so we can do statistics. And so that subjective element gets lost very easily because you can't see it on a graph.
But beyond those definitions, we've learned a lot about smell and smell loss and smell dysfunctions. Particularly, I mean, that was the one good gift of COVID, so to speak, is that everybody started talking about smell and chemosensory communication and function in a whole different way and in a more nuanced way. Are there things that we've learned from these experiences that could lead to treatment, recovery, further understanding? Because it seems that you learn a lot from loss. You learn a lot from when things go wrong about how things can go right. How can we make this right?
So, I mean, I think we've learned a lot. Chrissi can speak to the effectiveness of some of the new treatments. It's galvanized a lot of research in the area. It used to be very, very niche. Now there are a lot more researchers interested in it, although perhaps not as many as there were 4 years ago. PRP injections came out. Evidence that stellate ganglion block doesn't work came out. More people are, I can see. It used to be before the pandemic, I was one of only 2 smell clinics in the entire country, and now they're popping up all over the place. And people are taking it seriously as a research area. So you're right, there are lots of good things that have come out of it. Now understanding has advanced, but it's still, I was giving talks in 2008 about the Cinderella sense, and it's still, to a certain extent a bit ignored. But Chrissi has been a large part of promoting that and driving it forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think while things like PRP are quite interesting, they are, and I mean, I'm just trying to think of other things, the sort of supplements, omega-3, things like that. They are not cures in themselves. They are a way to put our bodies in a place to maximize whatever regeneration potential we have. And there are so many people out there who arrive into the groups not knowing anything about olfaction, and they're looking for a cure. I mean, I can remember in the very beginning of the pandemic, the first question was, when am I going to get my sense of smell back 100%? And I want it back to exactly where it was before, and I don't want any of this like other stuff. It's got to be that or nothing. And where is the cure? Where's the pill? And that is just not an option. It's like saying, if you get into an accident and you have a terrible scar, you can't expect that scar to disappear entirely. It's going to be a question of recovery and regeneration and regrowth, and a certain way of changing your expectations about what recovery is, that's going to bring you on to the next step. So while I'd love to see further developments in PRP, I mean, I think, who knows, there may be further ways to refine what they're doing, make it cheaper. That would be nice too. Let's see what else is going to come down the pike.
Do you want to tell people what PRP is? And I know you've had experience with it.
Simon, you go.
Well, you're the one who's got the benefit.
I've had it. But,
and it works. Yeah. So PRP is called protein-rich plasma. It's basically you take a sample of someone's blood and you spin it down, and the liquid bit that comes off is it's got lots of uses. It's used to regenerate joints and all sorts of things. But Lechin did it in 2024. Anyway, around the pandemic, somebody had the idea that they could do this and inject it in, and it's supposed to have a lot of growth factors and things like that that help regeneration. Inject it into the olfactory cleft and see if it worked. And they did a couple of patients, and they published, frankly, unbelievable results. But somebody, Zara Patel, took this seriously in Stanford and did a trial, and she showed that actually it does work for some people. Not 100%, and it's not a cure, but it does cause improvement. So that it is now a recognized trial. But the numbers aren't great. It's not a very high chance that you get your sense of smell back. And the earlier you do it after losing it, the better. but it can help some people. And Chrissi's one of them.
It feels pretty weird, I have to say. It's a long needle.
Yeah. Basically, you need someone like me with a long needle and an endoscope to stick it into the top of the nose and just inject it under local anesthetic. You usually have about three injections over every 2 weeks or so, and then you wait and see, and you hope that it works. But we don't know, as Chrissi said, we don't know what it is that's doing it. We don't know why it works. We don't know where the optimum place to inject it is. We don't know whether we should do it further back or up front, or there's a lot of work still to be done. But it is some hope, and there are other people who are looking at other markers of regeneration and tablets that may be coming to the market to try and help this olfactory regeneration. But as Chrissi says, it's all about getting the body out of its own way and allowing the natural process of regeneration to take over. But that's what antibiotics do. So it's not to say that it doesn't have a role. A lot of our job as doctors is actually getting out of the body's way and just letting it do what it needs to do, just making it do it in the right way.
I think I've gotten to most of the questions in the chat, but I do want to open it up to anybody who has a specific question for Chrissi or Simon, or wants to know more about the World Taste and Smell Association to let us know. You could use the nifty little react button and raise your hand, or just put a note in the chat, and you can unmute yourself.
So Stephanie, I'm looking in the chat bar. I see all kinds of questions. Do you have another? Yeah, I'm in the chat bar, but is there a Q&A bar as well?
There's not a Q&A bar. It's just the chat.
Yeah, it's just the chat. So I want to respond to something Paula asked.
Great.
Which is about, can a smell training kit not be developed that would desensitize you to the disgusting things in parosmia? I thought about that. The problem is that these things that are disgusting are so dangerous to handle because they are so incredibly concentrated. No chemical provider of odorant sort of compounds will provide you with what you need. And even if they did, you'd have to store it in a secure facility. It's just not, unfortunately, it's just not possible.
And we did have some worries about making things worse as well.
Yeah.
In the beginning.
Yeah.
So I want to say, by the way, I didn't get to the top of the ladder. So that nasal ablation is the top, and I think that's drastic, and I've not done it, and I wouldn't. A temporary ablation with using things like cocaine in the olfactory cleft, but in between there are some drugs that can help. Gabapentin can often be quite useful. That is a controlled drug in this country, and it's usually used for pain, but it does dull the sense of smell and can be quite useful in allowing you to get through the worst parts of parosmia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I had such a terrible reaction to that drug. I tried it, but I know it's widely prescribed for a variety of nerve pain as well in the U.S. There's another question besides PRP and stellate ganglion blocks. What other treatments are available or being developed?
If I can speak to the stellate ganglion, so there is a trial of stellate ganglion. I was always highly skeptical of the utility. It's a bit of the nervous system that's nowhere near the olfactory nerve, and I just couldn't believe that it would have any effect. It was one person who really tried this in the early stages, didn't have a control group, didn't test olfaction before or after, just asked people if they felt better. But it's now had a trial and it doesn't work. It doesn't make any difference to parosmia. But because as I said, the normal progression of parosmia is improvement, it looks like it can. But this is why it's so important to do proper trials, and why it's so difficult to see what works.
And if I could also add into the whole sort of question of stellate ganglion block, it is used for PTSD, and it seems to stop the circular negative thoughts and this sort of cycle of anxiety that people get with PTSD. And of course, what is the most prominent effect of parosmia? It's this rising anxiety over the constant panic button effect. So I could see why some people were experiencing some sort of relief from their anxiety. It was dampening all that down. And we also know that your state of mind really affects your perception of odors. So the way you experience a smell at a moment of great distress will be different from the way you experience that smell when you're having a pleasant experience. So all these things can add into that. And so I could see why some people were experiencing relief, but it has to also be said, stellate ganglion block, you have it and 2 weeks later it's worn off and you need to have another one. So it is not the cure that people were saying it was on social media. And there was somebody in Scottsdale, Arizona, or I can't remember whether a sort of physiotherapist that was just giving out these stellate ganglion blocks by the hundreds. And I also
it's not 100% safe, like anything.
And of course he was making a packet on it and was on YouTube and this is the cure. And let me tell you about the cure and all that. It wasn't a cure. And it's certainly, as you say, Simon, it's nonsensical to think that it would affect the olfactory system in any way. So, or any way that we can envision. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and you have to keep an open mind to these things. But I would put the prior probability of it being successful very low, and so there are probably better places that we can put our investigative efforts. But there are sort of startup pharma companies who are interested in this space. They are looking at the science that has already been done even prior to the pandemic, looking at olfactory regeneration cues and things like that. And they keep telling me they're close to market, so we'll see what happens in the next year or so.
So we have a couple other questions in the chat. Lisa Megna and Dorla Eason, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask your questions, you're welcome to. Dorla?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. This has been great. All really good information, and I'm so grateful to have found the group online in Facebook that gave me the information to join this. I have been diagnosed with a mucus retention cyst, and that kind of came after my loss of smell and taste in February from having flu A. Now, previously, I also lost smell and taste when I had COVID, but it returned when I got well. So my question is the mucus, can that be related? Because my ENT tells me no, mucus retention cyst could not be related to your loss of smell and taste. But I wanted to ask the experts here today.
Sounds like a me question. So no, I would agree with your ENT. I'm not sure I agree with your ENT that you need them taken out. They're a very common finding, and they just sit there often. They don't really do anything. But it's not in any place which is doing any smelling. They're usually hidden in the cheek sinuses, just above the teeth.
Right.
So yeah, no. But if you only just lost your sense of smell earlier this year, you've got a good chance of recovery. The more smell training you do.
I'm working on it. Thank you, sir.
Lisa, you had a question about blood types.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if you have found in your research that the people who suffer from parosmia have any their bodies are similar, their blood types or anything like that? I mean, is there something that makes certain people more susceptible? Not maybe outside viruses, but something that their body chemistry is made up of.
That's a very interesting question. That's not something that I have ever looked at. There's no indication in the literature, but of course, you don't look for those associations. You don't always find them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not blood type. I mean, there are actually many, many different types of blood types. You're talking about the classical ABOs and rhesus blood types, but there are actually many, many more. And they don't seem to affect that much. But I can imagine something called the major histocompatibility complex, which is a sort of major protein within the immune system, which often stratifies. So we know, for instance, that people who, women, for instance, who are ovulating prefer the smell of T-shirts worn by men with a different MHC. So there's some evidence that actually women are attracted to people who have a different immune subtype. And the theory is that, everything else being equal, they will have a broader immune coverage and better immune systems. But interestingly, when they're pregnant or on the pill, they like the smell of T-shirts worn by men with the same major histocompatibility complex proteins. So they like the smell of people who are very similar to them, their child or their family.
So is that like a pheromone smell that you're discussing?
Or pheromones are
level?
very complicated. So the question is, what do you mean by pheromone? But it's olfactory mediated. Yes, it's the smell of something, but pheromones are it's very difficult to pin down exactly what is a pheromone and what is just a reaction to a smell.
Because I'd have to say,
yes, it does seem to be this.
Yeah, the scent of my husband is what I miss the most out of anything.
Yeah,
that familiar scent is probably the worst.
Yeah,
but I just wasn't sure if there were any studies. Yeah.
And for me, it was most distressing that the smell of people around me was one of the parosmia triggers at one point. So
yeah.
I hear you.
Yeah, I've had that.
Lauren?
Or your own body odor. That's the worst.
Also had an interesting question, Lauren. If you would unmute yourself and ask your question, that would be terrific. If she's not here, then I will read it, which is, can you talk about smells, like smelling the air, smelling ourselves, the beach, any faint sense? It sounds like research says those will never come back.
So I'd like to jump in here and say, speaking from experience, and of course this is just one person's experience, but
one person who's talked to thousands.
Yeah, but
sorry, I'm here. But go ahead.
Why didn't you ask it again?
My question?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry for the noise. So my question is mainly based on smells. Like you guys were just talking about, like the smell of my husband. Like I can't smell the world. You know, when you take a nice shower, I cannot smell myself. I can't smell my hair. From what I've read, it sounds like those sort of smells are, not very present. Like when you smell a lemon or when you smell like coffee or whatever, it sounds like those smells are just not going to come back. And like, I hope that's not true, because it's like when you hug someone or you go into someone's house, you smell that, and like people like us, we just don't have that anymore. And I think my question is just like, has there been research for people that have gotten that back, or is it different?
So, as someone who felt those losses very keenly, I was very surprised as I was recovering the first time. So let's say between 2013 and 2019, that some of these really subtle ambient smells were available to me, even though I wasn't able to smell some of the more potent smells in the environment. So that would be, as an example, clean laundry, the smell of paperback books, and just the ambient smell of walking down the road and feeling like I was aware that it was springtime or that it was winter and people were using their chimneys. So, at least for me, and I've had multiple losses, and I've also had PRP, but in between all of those ups and downs, these subtle smells have been available to me. So I wouldn't give up hope. I don't know how long it's been for you, or even how you lost
4
your
years. And
4 years.
COVID, had COVID pretty badly and just kind of went out like a candle, my smell. It's actually 4 years today, so it's like kind of emotional, but yeah. And I literally, everyone tells me, oh my God, you're so young. I'm like, yeah, I'm so young. And this is like such a tragedy, So thank you.
Smell is emotional. Smell is emotional. Smell is emotional.
Yeah,
and in fact, I'm doing an interview with a woman called Rachel Hertz, who is at Brown University in Rhode Island this coming Saturday. And she wrote an article recently for a scientific publication having to do with smell and emotion, and why the connection is so strong, and why this adds an unseen layer to what we're experiencing right now. It's just given our emotions a real knock. So, yeah.
Thank you.
And I will underscore that there's so much that we don't know yet about our sense of smell and how it works and how it relates. This new research on smell mapping, which you'll see right up on the World Taste and Smell website and other places as well, is a new clue into maybe how our olfactory system is organized. So there's a lot of hope that as we find out more, we'll understand more. But because we don't really know how it works, we can hope that it will come back and there is some regeneration possible. I know for me, I have regained a good portion of my sense of smell, and I wish that for you as well.
Yeah.
Anja, you had a very interesting question about stress and triggers for parosmia. The question is, could it be easier getting parosmia when having a stressing time or trauma? Is the nervous system corresponding, not in the usual way?
Good question. Simon?
I'm not quite sure what it means corresponding. Does that mean responding? So I think,
Yes.
there's lots of research in general showing that human beings have what you can consider as a finite amount of cope. There's only so much stressful stuff that you can put up with. And so we see this, for instance, in tinnitus, this sound that people get in their ears. It's almost always worse when they're going through other kinds of stress, probably because they're burning through all their ability to cope on the other kinds of stress, and they're left with nothing to deal with this intrusive sound that's coming from inside their own brain. And I suspect the same is true from these things, from parosmia and from the other qualitative distortions. And certainly that's borne out by what my patients tell me. But again, the woman who's talked to more people with parosmia than I have might have some things to say about it.
Yeah, I agree completely. Parosmia will always be worse if you're feeling stressed out, or if you're feeling tired, or you've had some life-changing experience. People talk about how their parosmia becomes overwhelming because they're dealing with the death of a parent, or some life-changing situation. So that's something you want to keep an eye on. Absolutely.
I'm going to read out our last question because we are just about out of time. But the question from Clara is that occasionally she can taste certain foods correctly, but only for the first couple of bites. So I'd love for the two of you to talk a little bit about that, the first smell, the first bite, and how newness interacts with our chemosensory system.
Well, Chrissi and I have talked about this quite often.
Yeah.
So I think, well, why don't you take it?
No, Simon, you go on. You talk about receptors that tire out.
Yeah. Okay. So there is this function called habituation, where your nose gets used to smells, and this happens on multiple levels throughout the you can look and see olfactory receptor neurons. They wear out. They don't refresh their receptors. They tire out the signal that they send, so that you need to stimulate them more to sustain signal. In the olfactory bulb, which is the processing area, again, there's sort of lots of interaction between the sort of the centers that represent odorants. They can switch each other off and on, and they get more tired. So basically, the smell sense always wants to smell new things. If it can smell something that it already smells, it doesn't trigger. And so my mother always used to say this: the fox never smells his own hole. You get used to smells when they're ambient. And so what we think has been happening is a large characteristic of this disease is that those habituation mechanisms get thrown out of whack in some way. So in this case, yes, your habituation is worse than you would like it to be. It's basically switches on and then doesn't switch off. And Chrissi has this thing about olfactory flashes being characteristic of this kind of smell loss, is that you'll get a smell that'll be just a moment. And many of my patients who are otherwise completely anosmic will say, oh, it's just sometimes I just get a flash of normal smell and then it's gone again. And I think this is all a problem with habituation. But the question is at what level this is happening on. And I think also your smell lock and parosmia may be the opposite of this. In other words, you don't habituate to those things, those smells, and they get stuck in the brain in the same way. But yeah, there's certainly, this is the system that's severely out of whack. It's been built over many years as you grew up and has been suddenly damaged. And all of those sort of control mechanisms are all over the place. And that's why you're getting these kind of symptoms.
So I do want to thank you both, Mr. Simon Gane, Chrissi Kelly, for spending some time with all of us and for helping us live with parosmia. There was one last question in the chat about smell training. How often, how frequently? Keep at it in whatever way that works for you.
Follow Chrissi Kelly.
Yeah, yes. I've got a website, so if you'd like more, I just put in a note to Sheila. I do smell training events, so you can read about that on my website, ckos.co.uk.
The World Taste and Smell Association.
Yes, absolutely.
We really aggregate information and provide resources for everybody, both innovating in the world of taste and smell and suffering from smell and taste dysfunction. And I particularly want to thank all of you for joining us and for all the information that you share with us of your personal experience. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you so much.